And Steve Stine here from Guitar Zoom. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about modes. If you've been with me at all this week, we're spending this whole week talking about music theory. We're celebrating the fact that we've opened up our music theory masterclass for purchase. So this whole week, we're talking about music theory concepts. And what I did was I decided to put together a 5-day kind of training that elevates each day. So the first day, we talked about notes on the guitar and memorizing that sort of thing. The second day, we talked about the major scale and the chords that go with it. The third day, yesterday, we talked about arpeggios. Well, today we're going to be talking about basic ideas of what are modes. So make sure that you join me again tomorrow. We're going to be talking, it's 4 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to be talking about trying to put a bunch of this stuff together in a realistic soloing kind of situation. So that's what we're going to be doing. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. It's so awesome that you take time out of your day every day to be with me. This is great. And I hope I can teach you a little bit about music theory, and today certainly about modes. And do me a favor, if you get a chance, check out the Music Theory Masterclass guitar course. You can click on the link. There'll be a link in the chat. I think Derek's putting something in there for you. Otherwise, there'd be a link, above or below this video, depending on if you're on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. And see if it's something that you might be interested in. For me, I've always thought that music theory is something that is very, very important, but it's really important if you're learning how to use it in your day-to-day practice. If it's just a concept, that's great, but really the most important thing is being able to use it in your playing. So what I want to talk about today, the first thing I want to do is just talk about what is a mode, real basic, and then what's a way that you could practice your modes to keep things nice and easy. And the reason I say that is if you have any experience at all with learning scales, one thing that we do is we learn how to play scales in all the positions, as many places across the entire fretboard, that sort of thing. And that is absolutely wonderful. And we want to learn how to do that. But sometimes which is what we're going to do tomorrow, we learn how to combine different ideas together in a position on the guitar. And maybe we don't need the entire fretboard at that moment in time, but instead maybe just little shortcuts or little ideas. So, and if you joined me yesterday for the arpeggios, you know what I'm talking about, because you could find a note on the guitar or a chord or whatever you're trying to find, and then build around that idea, right? So yesterday we were talking about arpeggios. Let me get this in my screen here. So if I was doing G, we talked about how G could be played there, or there, and then how we could build out. If I played G, B, and D, I could then play G, B, and D, and then G, B, and then I run out of strings. But so I wind up with this larger sized arpeggio just by learning to visualize those notes on the fretboard, okay? Well, with modes, what happens, let's first talk about what a mode is. So we learned that the G major scale was do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We did that on Tuesday. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay? It's the major scale. It's kind of the scale that makes the whole musical world go round. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay. And that's great. We could play that in the key of G, or we could play that in the key of A, or we could play that in the key of D, or whatever. What happens, though, is, and I always use this analogy, even though it's not completely true, but if we go back historically, far enough in history, prior to harmony, so before we learned to sing, two different pitches together, which creates chords and that sort of thing, if we go back even further than that, to where we were just singing things in unison. There was never harmony. We were just singing together, okay? And this is not a true story, but you'll understand what I mean. So if we go back to that time and we think about how we developed the major scale, right? So you have all these people singing together, and they're all singing the same pitches, and they're singing... And then somebody goes, okay, so that's great, but can we do it in a different key? Okay, well, let's do it in the key of A. Oh, that's great. Okay, well, let's do it in the key of D. Okay, so you can see after a while, they're like, well, changing keys doesn't really do anything. We're just singing it higher or lower, but it sounds the same every single time. Okay? So this is where... And again, this is not a true story. It's just giving you an idea. So somebody came up with the idea of going, okay, so let's be in the key of G, or whatever key. Let's use the key of G for our example. Let's be in the key of G, okay? But instead of having our main note be G, and then we go to all the other notes, let's be in the key of G, use all the notes of the key of G, and for us, all the chords of the key of G, okay? But instead of starting on G and emphasizing G, which makes logical sense, let's choose another note. Let's choose the sixth note, and in our case, the sixth chord. Okay, so let's think about that. In the key of G, and we learned this on day 2, I think. So if I'm in the key of G and I go to the sixth note, it's E. And we learned that 1, 4, 5 are always major and 2, 3, 6 are always minor. So the sixth chord is minor, so we get an E minor chord. So whoever came up with this idea was saying, let's be in the key of G, but let's use E as our main note. Let's use the E minor chord as our main chord. So instead of playing G, C, D, G, let's substitute G. Instead of using G, let's use E minor, and then C, and then D, and then E minor. And for the first time in history, again, this is fake, but the first time in history, we had a minor key. So if you know anything about, piano or anything, you learn what's called relative major and minor. And what that means is the key of C major has no sharps and no flats, and the key of A minor has no sharps and no flats. So they use the same notes, so they're relative. I would even go further and say that they are the same thing. The only difference is C major, when you're in the key of C major, you're emphasizing the chord C major. When you're in A minor, you're still in C major, but you're emphasizing the chord A minor. That's the idea of what modes are, okay? Even though when you learn relative major and minor in your piano lessons, you don't think about it as modes, but that is a mode, okay? Because what a mode means is degree. All it means is we're in this key, we have 7 notes, we have 7 chords, and what we're going to do is instead of just playing that same scale in different keys, and it always sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, I'm going to emphasize a different note inside this scale, inside the key of G. And in emphasizing that different note, I'm going to emphasize a different chord. If I emphasize the 6th chord, I'm emphasizing the sound of a minor chord, E minor. Well, that's monumentally different right there, right? Because now all of a sudden your primary chord is E minor. And you're giving the sound of that E minor, which sounds entirely different. So even if you played the G major scale over the top of that, it's still going to sound drastically different. So the important thing to understand that is when people write songs, the song itself, it isn't just about a scale, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into a song. And a lot of times as guitar players, we get so caught up in this idea of like soloing. The solo doesn't define the key or the mode. The chords define the key or the mode, and the solo represents, in whatever capacity you want it to, some connection to that chord progression. So always remember that. So that's the beginning of modes, is understanding that what a mode is being in a key, in a major key, in do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but you're emphasizing some other chord. Well, if we go back to our history lesson here, now we've got 1 and we've got 6. G major, E minor. And they said, hey, let's call that major and let's call 6 minor. So G major, E minor. Even though they both use the same notes, they both use the same chords, but G major is emphasizing G major and E minor is emphasizing the chord E minor, but they're both using the same thing. So now we could sing songs that are in E minor and we could sing songs that are in G major. Again, even though they really are the same thing. The difference is the emphasis, right? But they're both using the same chords, both using the same notes, all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, that's perfect. So we have major and minor. Again, piano players, oftentimes when you're learning from your teacher, they call that relative major and minor. If you're learning theory, relative major, minor. Okay, relative major, minor. So that gives us that. Okay, perfect. We're happy. So now we move on. We're, they're writing music, singing songs using major or minor. Then somebody comes along and goes, wait a second. So if you can use the 1 chord or note, or the 6 chord or note, how come we can't do the 2 chord? Or the 3 chord, or the 4 chord, or the 5 chord, or the 7 chord? Why are we only using 1 and 6? Okay. Let's go with the 2. Okay, so we're in the key of G, and now we have a 2 chord. Well, what's the 2 chord in the key of G? If you were with me on Tuesday, G major, the 2 chord would be A minor, because 1, 4, 5 is always major, 2, 3, 6 is always minor. And again, don't get freaked out if you don't know this stuff. It's okay. You can learn it all from Music Theory Masterclass, okay? So it's a 2 chord, which is A minor. Well, that causes some confusion because we can't just call it A minor, because if we call it minor, it means it's a 6 chord. That was the slang we came up with. Major meant 1, minor meant 6. Well, the 2 chord in the key of G major is also minor, but we can't just call it minor because people would think it's a 6 chord, and that would put us in the key of C. That's a different key. So that's where they started coming up with these names. Okay? So if you've ever heard these before, and if you haven't, it's okay, but if you have, Ionian means 1. It's a fancy big word that means 1. Dorian means 2. So there's our solution. If we're going to be in the key of G major, but we want to emphasize the 2nd chord, which is A minor, we want to make that sound like our main chord. We can't just say A minor, but we can say A Dorian. And what that tells everybody else, Dorian means 2. So if you say A Dorian, it means, hey, we're going to be in the key of G, which is the 1. A minor is 2. Dorian means 2. So it's telling everybody we're in the key of G major, but we're emphasizing the 2nd chord, which is A minor. A Dorian means we're in G major, but we're emphasizing the A minor chord. Now, what would that sound like? Well, let's take our G, C, D, G, and instead of playing G, let's play A minor instead. Now we got ourselves a Dorian chord progression. We're in the key of G major. We haven't left G major. I can still use that scale. Again, there's phrasing things and stuff that I would want to change about my approach. Like I wouldn't just want to play up and down a scale ever anyway. But those notes would work. So Ionian means 1. Dorian means 2. Phrygian means 3. So Phrygian is minor, because if you remember, our 3rd chord in the major scale is minor. So Phrygian is just telling everybody, hey, we're in the key of G, but we're emphasizing the 3rd chord, which would be B minor in this case. Lydian means 4. Mixolydian means 5. Aeolian means 6. And Locrian or Locrian, however you want to say it, means 7. So if we go back to what we talked about on Tuesday, we learned that the 1, 4, 5 chords in the key of G are major. The 2, 3, 6 chords in the key of G are minor. So, and again, I know I'm rushing this a little bit because we only have so much time and I don't want to waste your time. I'm just kind of explaining this to you. So that means that Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and these are what you'd have to learn. And again, we talk all about these in the guitar course, okay? But Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian are all major modes because their main chord is a major chord, 1, 4, 5. 2, 3, 6, on the other hand, are all minor. So those are all the minor modes, which are Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. And then the diminished is the 7th. That's kind of the outlier. There is that 7th chord one, which is Locrian or Locrian. But again, I always tell people modes are so easy, they're hard. Because people make them way harder than they need to be. Okay? Where if you really understand that as soon as somebody starts talking about modes, what they're doing is telling you you're in a major key, but we're emphasizing some other chord in the key of whatever key we're in this case, the key of G. That's what it means. So when you hear a crazy word like Dorian, Dorian just means we're emphasizing the 2nd chord in whatever key we're in. If you hear Phrygian, it means we're emphasizing the 3rd chord in whatever key we're in. Both of those are minor. So it would have a minor kind of sound. And again, this goes back to our arpeggio day with the root, minor third, and the fifth, right? That kind of sound. If we're doing Lydian or Mixolydian, that means we're emphasizing the 4 or the 5 chords. Those are both major. So they're going to have a root, major third, and fifth sound. So hopefully you can kind of see how all this stuff is connected. And I don't expect you to understand all these things. Again, I just want to introduce you to these, and hopefully you can walk away with something that you can use from today. And if you need more information, please check out Music Theory Masterclass and see if it's something that could help you with this. Okay? So if that makes sense, so we started with just major. The world was just major, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And then somebody was introduced to the idea of minor, emphasizing a minor chord, which was the 6th chord. But then somebody screwed it up and said, well, what about 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7? What if we emphasized one of those chords? And that's where we couldn't just call things major and minor anymore. We had to come up with terms. And those terms were Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian or Locrian. Again, however you want to say it. I usually say Locrian. But, and those told us what degree we were on. They're really crazy names to really just tell us what degree we're emphasizing in the major scale. That's what it is. But before we're done here, what I want to do is I want to give you something to practice, okay? So let's go ahead and just go back to our G major right now. There's our G major scale right there. The one we've been working with all week. And again, you might play it, up here. Wherever it is you want to go, it's perfectly fine. But what I want to do is I want to show you the difference between these modes so you can see how subtle the difference is, but yet how important it is, okay? So what happens here, and again, we study this in the course, but I just want to give you some things to think about. So what we know is that in the key of G, we get 3 major chords and 3 minor chords, which means we get 3 major modes and 3 minor modes. So what I want to do is I want to compare these so you can see what they sound like, okay? So if we play the major scale, which is technically Ionian major, which is what we've been playing the whole time, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. If we were to play Lydian, which is the 4 chord, what happens is, if I was to compare the major scale with the Lydian mode, what happens is Lydian winds up with what we call a sharp 4. And you get a really cool kind of sound with that. Now again, understand, modes go further than the 20 minutes that we're talking about this sort of thing. But I want to show you so at least you get an idea. So when somebody says Lydian, just Lydian, you can be thinking, okay, so what a Lydian scale is a major scale with a raised 4th. That's what it sounds like. So I'm comparing G major with G Lydian. I'm not playing G major and then moving to the Lydian inside there. I'm literally comparing apples to apples here. So I'm taking the 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, the perfect 4th there, and I'm raising it. I do that, it sounds like what we call Lydian. Okay, so let's wash our ears and get that sound out. We're going to go back to major. Now we're going to look at the other major mode, which is Mixolydian. And Mixolydian is a major scale with a flatted 7th. Okay, it's a cool sound, gives you kind of a pentatonic bluesy kind of. So that's what happens there. So if we were comparing apples to apples, G major to G Lydian to G Mixolydian, now we can see the difference between those. Okay? So I'm not in the key of G. I'm showing you what the 3 modes would actually look like if you stack them on top of each other. G major, with its major seventh, G Lydian with its raised fourth, and G Mixolydian where we flat that seventh, we lower that seventh sound, okay? So again, there's a lot to learn about modes, but at least it gets you going a little bit. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the minor modes, okay? So I'm just gonna I'll just stay with apples here. I'm gonna stay with G minor. So I'm just gonna play a regular plain old minor scale. In the key of G. So I'm playing a root, major third, or excuse me, major second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth here, and then my minor seventh, and then my root. And it's okay if you don't know those, just kind of visualize what I'm doing here. So I'm playing, and again, you can watch this later and learn this as well. So I'm playing 3, 5, 6, 3, 5, 6, 3, 5. And that's just a standard natural minor or Aeolian scale, or what we call the minor scale. So if I wanted to convert this into one of the minor modes, because remember, again, in any major key, you get 3 major chords, 3 minor chords. Now, we're not in a key right now. I'm just showing you comparing scales to scales, apples to apples. So I'm showing you just a regular G minor scale, okay? If we wanted to do one of the other modes, the minor modes, what we would do is, for instance, if we wanted to look at Dorian, what we would do is we would take this minor scale and we would raise the 6th note. So now it's going to look a little like major again there. And then this note's going to look like Mixolydian. Okay, and you get some cool sounds. If we were to look at the next one, which is going to be Phrygian, again, wash our palette here. We're going to go back. It's regular minor. If we wanted to do Phrygian, we would lower the second. And so instead of playing a major second, we would play a minor second. This is going to sound crazy. Okay? So what happens is there's very subtle differences between each one of these things, but you can hear how they change. And every time they change, they're no longer do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do anymore, right? So there's really 2 ways to learn your modes. One way is relative, being in a key and learning that inside that key, we can emphasize one of these other chords inside this key. The other way to learn modes is to learn them relative to each other, kind of a parallel approach, if you will. So understanding that major looks and sounds like this, Lydian looks and sounds like this, and Mixolydian looks and sounds like this. They're all major, but how are they different from each other? How are they similar? How are they different? So that's 2 very different approaches to the way that you can learn modes. But at least today, hopefully you learned what is a mode, okay, by me telling you these crazy stories, okay? And then just really understanding the simplicity of the idea of the mode doesn't mean it can't get complicating. But if you back out and just understand, whenever we're talking about modes, we're talking about being in some key and emphasizing something within that key, okay? We still got to set everything up on our fretboard and stuff like that, but at least now you can also practice the differences between each one so you can see the differences in sound as well. So do me a favor, check out the guitar course, click on the link in the chat or in the description or wherever it might be. See if it's something that you're interested in. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully you learned a little something. Remember, you can always go back and watch the other videos as well, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or whatever it might be, and keep learning about this stuff, and then hopefully tomorrow you'll have time to join me again at 4 p.m. Pacific, is it? I'm in Central Time, 4 p.m. Pacific, so I always forget what the time zones are. 4 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to be talking about combining scales for effective solos. I'm going to show you some really cool little things that you can do to kind of add to your playing. All right? So take care, stay positive, and I will talk to you all very